Welcome back to the channel this week. This week we're going to be talking about prime lenses and zoom lenses and which one I think is more appropriate for the beginning photographer. And we're going to be primarily dealing with Fuji lenses here, but it really doesn't really matter. It can be used for any camera system out there. And let me give you a little bit of history first. When I was just a kid, in high school, my father got my brother and I used Leica M3s with 50mm lens on it. And I used that lens all the way through high school, shooting tons of yearbook photos and everything. And by the time I got done with it, I was pretty used to shooting with a 50mm lens and what I could get in, how I would compose with it, and all sorts of things. And then I was able to get myself used 35mm Sumeron, Leica Sumeron lens. It's a really small lens, and let me show you what it looks like here. This is the Sumeron right here. And I gotta tell you, the cool thing about it is that I got this really cool little viewfinder with it. You can see how small it is. And the cool thing about this is that I could get used to this 35mm lens just by looking through this viewfinder. I could carry this viewfinder anywhere I wanted with me, and I could do compositions with it. I could look with it like this. I could really zero in on how to use this lens. And I gotta tell you, I'm telling you, this is one of the things that really helped me get used to shooting with this 35mm lens. And the 50mm lens that I shot with in high school is on this Leica M3 here. And this is a Sumeron 1.5. And boy, it's been beat up. This lens is hammered. But I gotta tell you, I really enjoyed it. It's really kind of tough to focus now. It needs a good going over. But I have to say that using those prime lenses at the time really got me used to zeroing in on how I would focus on things and make my compositions more impactful. So you older folks out there are used to shooting film back in the day. The Pentax K1000, the AE1, the A1 program came with a 50mm lens. And really that's what you were stuck with, and that's what most people shot with. And nowadays that has really changed because the zoom lenses of today are really great. They're nice and sharp all the way around, or mostly all the way around. The only problem with them is that the f2.8 versions are big and heavy. Excuse me, I'm recovering from bronchial infection, so that's why I've been away for a couple of weeks. So anyway, you had to, back then with film, you might have come across Vivitar Series 1. This is a 28-105, and it's a pretty nice little lens, although it did have some difficulties, and it was a macro at the same time. I got used to shooting with the 70-210 version of it, the f3.5, and it was a great lens. I really loved having that lens until this Canon f2.8 came out, and I got used to shooting with this instead. But what I'm getting at here is that prime lenses really make you zoom with your feet. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why a prime lens is good for you, and then I'm going to give you 5 reasons why a zoom lens might be good for you. And I'm going to zero in really on what I think is probably best for the beginning photographer. So, okay, here we go. The 5 reasons why I think prime lenses are best for you to start with. First thing is you have to learn how to zoom with your feet. Walk in and out and get used to framing subjects with a certain focal length lens. And number 2, you really become adept at learning what you can and cannot photograph with that lens effectively. Be it a 28, a 35, or a 50, doesn't really matter. And you learn fairly quickly, number 3, you learn fairly quickly, for instance, that you can do a lot of things. For instance, with a 50, you can shoot a portrait with it. You can shoot a fairly wide shot with it. There's a lot of things you can do with a 50. 35, you can do pretty much the same thing, but you've got to get a lot closer to make sure your images have impact. Number 4, composition is really big. You got to make sure that you have an impactful photo by making sure your composition is just right. Now, the last thing here is most prime lenses are faster f-stop, like f2 or 1.4 or even 0.95 or 1, and your bokeh is going to be a lot different than if you're shooting with an f4 lens, which is mostly what the zoom lenses today are, especially the kit lenses. And that's primarily what I'm talking about here is the kit zoom lenses. Let's talk a little bit about zoom lenses. And I previously mentioned that I used a 70-210 Series 1 Vivitar, which was a fabulous lens back in the day. This is back in like 1978. I was at the, the Canoe and Kayak Pre-World Championships in Quebec, Canada in 1978. And a guy from the Washington Post loaned me his Nikon F1, I think it was, with a 70-210 Vivitar Series 1 3.5. And I was shooting Kodachrome 64 at the time, and I fell in love with that lens. I absolutely love that lens, and I had to kind of put it on hold until I got to the Canon system and I could afford to purchase that lens because it was a great lens. And I stepped away from that lens when I finally purchased, not this particular lens, but this 200 f2.8. It really made a lot of difference. And then Canon came out with their own zoom lens, which I then purchased, which really made a big difference in what I was doing with zoom lenses. Now, the zoom lenses of today have changed quite a bit. This is Fuji's 18-55, and I gotta tell you, 2.8, and it's metal. This thing's made out of metal. It's not cheap plastic. And I gotta tell you, it's a 2.84. I gotta tell you, it's a great lens. This lens is phenomenal. So far, I've really enjoyed it. And I've come up with 5 reasons why zoom lenses are pretty good. Now, number 1 is, there's a whole bunch of focal lengths in one lens, which is great. You don't have to switch lenses back and forth. I remember back in the day, I had 8 lenses in a bag, and now you can just carry one lens, one zoom lens. You can change focal lengths without doing the foot zoom thing. You can sit there and figure out what your composition is with the zoom lens. Finding different compositions is much easier to do. Number 4, you can quickly crop out unwanted things on the sides, on the edges. And, you know, basically what it comes down to. Number 5, it's an all-in-one, no need for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 lenses, like I said. Fabulous, and there's nothing wrong with it. Especially this little zoom lens here made by Fuji, the 18-55. This is the best kit lens I have ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them, a lot of junk out there. And you know, when it comes down to it, when you first buy a camera, you know, you want to buy a kit because it's all in one. You don't have to worry about it, and they have cut prices on them and everything, so you get this little zoom lens for a lot less money. And let's talk a little bit about how you can use a zoom lens as a prime lens. Very interesting. The setup is that you can actually set this. They have settings for 18, 23, 35, and 55. So you could basically set this on 23, tape it down, and you have the same type of the same type of camera with a prime lens, except you're using a zoom lens. And I think that's just, it's a great way to go. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you could do when you're first starting out in photography to buy either some kind of kit or some kind of made-up kit that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And what I suggest you do is you look for a used XT30 like this one here. And you can find this camera anywhere from $500 to $650, and it's a great camera. It's a 26 megapixel camera. It's well worth the money. Now, if you also look for a 35 or a 23, this is a 23 right here, and learn how to use the 23 f2, and I'm going to tell you right now, you'll be a better photographer for it, in my view. Now, a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but this is a great little lens and camera kit, and you can get this for under $1,000 used. And believe me, the mileage on the XT30 is not going to be huge because they came out with a new one, an XT32, which is a little bit different. The guts are a little bit different. Everything else is exactly the same. So I have some suggestions here. I'm going to post them right up here. And what I'm suggesting is that you look on fredmiranda.com because you can find some really good deals on equipment that is in great shape. You know, the other sites that you can go to, MBP, or whatever the heck it is. And let's see, there's some others that are, you know, they're worth looking at, but sometimes the equipment can be pretty beat up. And Miranda, the stuff's not beat up at all. The stuff it's almost mint. So my suggestion is that, or you can go with the same camera, but with the 18 to 55 right here. The 18 to 55, look how small this is. This is great right here. This is a great setup right here. But for me, the cheaper version, the 23 or the 35 and the XT30 is a great choice. So that's it for my breakdown of what I think is good for you for beginning photographers using the Fuji system or any other system. You can really break it down as far as learning how to use a focal length first, one focal length, then move on to another focal length, and then move into a zoom lens. And I think you'll find your images are much, much better. So that's it for this week, and I hope you like what I've done here in breaking it down for you. And believe me, you know, I was lucky. I started out with two prime lenses on these Leica film cameras that I really, really enjoy. And someone has given me this A1 here with a 50mm lens. Great stuff. Can't wait to shoot some film with this. So that's it for this week, and hopefully you'll like and subscribe. And remember, it's not what you photograph, it's how you photograph it, and we'll catch you next time.